Welcome to another episode of Traumatically Triumphant. The person on the other side of the screen who looks and maybe sounds somewhat similar to me is none other than my brother, Josh Grashin. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're probably one of the first people who ever told me to listen to a podcast, I think.
Really?
Yeah, because you were always my TV and media person. Like I never until quarantine I didn't go into the deep dives of the like webosphere,
So
And
you were late to the game because I'm usually late, but you were really late.
no, you to me you knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And also for our merch shout out, thank you for this shirt that you got me from Columbus, Ohio. He's on
Oh,
fire, boom shakalaka. Um,
homage. Good stuff.
Yeah, it was a cool store. Um, anyway, welcome. So Josh is here to talk a little bit about his own personal story and trauma, but also he has recently been studying uh, therapy, counseling. How would you define it?
They're kind of synonymous in a lot of ways. Counseling, technically it's a counseling degree. A lot of people call themselves therapists. It depends on kind of the crowd you're talking to. I think that the term counselor has kind of done a 180 in pop culture. It used to be kind of a derisive term referred to like guidance counselors, which is
Mhm.
not even a term that people use anymore.
Right.
Um, but now you just kind of see it much more in pop culture, and with that has come a certain level of acceptance, I would say. So I have noticed a lot more people, and it could just be because I'm immersed in it, that people are now referring to themselves more as counselors versus therapists, but you kind of see both.
Interesting. Okay.
But it's a distinction from psychologists, which is much more, it's less people centric and it's more theory based, I would say.
Okay. So, for me, it's cool. Also, like, I know a little bit about what you do because I'm your brother, but also we don't like get into these long discussions about it. And now that this is kind of focusing around people's personal traumas, but really a lot on how they've rebuilt from them, I think even the way that you got into this was kind of interesting. And also, for the sake of the show, interesting to have someone who has maybe put legitimate study versus as an empirical person who likes
Mm-hmm.
to learn that way, and storytelling, is part of what I love to do. So what you studied psychology in college, if I recall, and then you got
Mm-hmm.
into digital marketing. So you were not late to the game because that was an early industry. You were early in the
Yeah.
industry. Um, and then moved out of the big city and like
Yeah,
got
well,
into this.
I had a college professor, and in retrospect, this was an incredibly naive thing to do. But when you're 20 or 21, you're not usually firing on all cylinders. But I had a professor who was a very successful businessman, and he said in class, and I'll always remember, he's like, if you like psychology and you want to make money, then you should go into marketing. Um, and I let that kind of dictate. It was that and other things. The I was definitely heavily influenced by a relationship that I was in at the time, and for considerable time afterward as well. Who I think, whether I can't blame her, but I think it put more of an emphasis on making money in my mind than probably I would have cared about on my own.
Mm-hmm.
um, and made it seem much harder for me to tackle something like going back to school. Uh, and so I kind of fell into marketing and was fine at it. I think I found my niche. I liked the people I worked with, at least in my last company. And then I met Debbie, and we moved to Columbus because neither of us were about that life.
Yeah.
Neither of us wanted to think and only do things based on monetary decisions, and moving to Columbus would kind of afford us that opportunity. And so I I don't know, there's a lot of factors that kind of led me to get there. And then I came here and had a job that I absolutely despised. And I realized that there was no way I was going to be happy for the rest of my life doing something I didn't care about. I had too long left to work. And
Right.
that kind of inspired me to switch gears like that.
It's interesting because I'm in a highly competitive industry, but the more I've been in it, the less I've been driven by money. And I think about our dad, who was a lawyer, et cetera, and did a lot of practical things to make money when we were younger. But I don't think he was ever, he's not that kind of person who's like driven by that. So I
What, you mean the
wonder.
guy who buys glasses for $15 routinely and cars from police auctions? Yeah.
Hey, that baby blue Cadillac that I did get to drive when they moved up to Alaska was not only like driving a yacht on land, it was very, very awesome. So no, but I just saying it's a trait that isn't always the norm, and it's interesting.
I've done a lot of thinking about this, as I do about a lot of things. Not always not always impressive thinking, but thinking nonetheless. Um, I think that like we are in a very lucky generation. You and I, and a lot of our peers are super lucky that we kind of had parents that grew up with parents that forced them to choose careers that would make money because that's where they were coming from. Like they are the children of parents that lived through the Depression, lived through World War II, lived through these horrific things. And so money had to be prioritized. And there was so much uncertainty about being Jewish, about being immigrants, about all these things that so many of our grandparents were not in our case, it happens to be. But I think it was very generational. So I think when you grow up amidst uncertainty, you react to it by craving certainty and independence. Um, and it's why Israelis are so entrepreneurial, I feel. And so I think that um, our dad was kind of forced, not forced, I'm sure it wasn't forced, but like he felt that he had to. And he did that in a lot of ways so that we would be able to do what we want.
Yeah.
And we're a very entitled generation. Um, and, but like, I'm fully aware that I never would have been able to do it without this, like what him and our mom have worked toward, like, because I always knew I had a safety net if I really needed it.
Right. Well, I was thinking you mentioned entitled generation because it's true. I mean, we're just talking about ideas over the clouds of internet waves and
Right.
whatever, and some people are just complaining about everything in their life while doing it, and they get a lot of attention for it. But I'm thankful to have a Holocaust survivor coming on the show soon, and it's like to me that's it's a privilege to have her because I've heard from grandpa and whatnot that we're like facing this time where we may be scaring ourselves with ideas in a way that could lead us down a really, really, really negative path with sort of this entitlement and this like, I don't know, coming to this like postmodern world of anything goes until it doesn't go and then it gets canceled. And so it's just interesting. I'm so curious to hear her perspective on like how to then like what she sees different. I'm reading her book right now, and I don't know. That was a bit of a sidebar, but so you got into counseling, but I mean, my understanding, like, so you kind of always wanted to do it, or was there something that kind of precipitated other than just the job?
Um,
Because your focus was pretty,
I would
specific.
say that I always thought the way I sort of articulated it to, and you do a lot of reflection when you're in these programs. It's 90% of what you do, I'd say. And um, I would say I was in a career where I could have continued doing it, though I had no desire to do what my bosses were doing at any point. And I would have been adequate. not particularly gifted at it, didn't particularly care. Um, During the job here that I hated, um, I remember one of the owners saying to me, and I'll paraphrase because I don't remember exactly. She basically said, "We're doing such important things. We're helping," because we work with much smaller companies than I did at the place in New York. "We're helping these people get their summer homes." And I was like, "Are you serious? Like, this is what matters to you?" There's like, and like, I understand. Like, I, it was great for help businesses succeed, but like that is not at all what I was passionate about. And I realized that like there was this huge disconnect between that and like I kind of thought that I always like had this natural thing that people came to me with issues and I would you know therapy is not really advice giving, but people would always come to me for advice. It's and it sort of occurred to me, I was like, you know what? If there's one thing in this world that I have a particular skill for that has been reinforced in me, by multiple people. Last night I was recording a Seahawks podcast with a friend of mine that I've known since I was 18 years old in Israel. And he saw that I had said on Facebook I was going to do it. And he said, anyone who had met you at 18 would have guessed you'd have done something in this world. So like, I wasn't at all surprised. And this is someone like, we've never had a conversation like
Who is
that.
it?
His name is Kiev, like Akiva Wienerker, probably someone you've
Okay.
never met. Someone I knew from Israel, but I've known literally since I was 18. So like half my life, more than half my life now. Jeez.
Yeah.
Um, and and so it just sort of felt like
It was.
a natural thing for me. And the reason I chose the program I chose was just circumstantial. Like I needed
Yeah.
something that was here. I wasn't going to move. Um, and luckily I got in. I don't know what I would have done otherwise. I maybe would have looked online, but I don't know.
And so one thing that we spoke about when I was like talking to you about the show initially was, for me, one of my theories is like a trauma in and of itself is, I guess, like one of the ways I can make an analogy for it can be something where it's like if you're lifting weights or you're exercising or you're doing some sort of exertion where you push yourself to a limit, you either like completely fatigue and break down,
Mm-hmm.
or you recover and you have the potential to then sort of like emerge stronger and with like more, I guess, awareness, consciousness, and maybe even the ability to help others. And so um like, I don't know how much you want to talk about, again, starting your family and how that kind of precipitated your focus, or led your focus a little bit in direction with, at least initially, where you wanted to go. But I do think that it's important, like from a more expert standpoint, to talk about what really is like from I guess maybe even from your standpoint, what do you see trauma as, and the potential harms, which can be numerous, and also the potential like
Mm-hmm.
growth opportunities.
Okay, well, there's a lot to unpack there. Um, I think that like I don't know, similar to a lot of words in this day and age, trauma gets thrown around quite easily. And try being like have 5 sessions with people from different walks of life from yourself, and you see what trauma is, and you see it in a much, much more acute way. And like bad things happen to everyone. Um, like one of my supervisor at my internship, he said, he's probably in his 50s, I would guess, and his dad died within the last decade. I don't remember exactly when, but he's told me he remembers his mom saying something along the lines of like, "Are you okay? Do you need to see someone? Like, is this?" And he's like, "Let me be clear. Like, I am grieving, but this is not a trauma. Like, this is sort of the natural order of things. I need to process it in my own way, but like, let's not call this a trauma. Like that gets thrown around. It wasn't like a
Mm-hmm.
sudden thing. He was sick and he died, and like, sadly, that happens all the time. Like, that's not to minimize people's pain, but like trauma is a very strong word. And I one of the last projects I did during the pandemic, so it's not like I remember much from all those online asynchronous classes, but like we did something about wellness, and one of the things we looked at was um, post-traumatic stress, which everyone has kind of heard of, versus post-traumatic growth. Um,
Mm.
and there were research studies kind of trying to see why people respond to the same events or same kinds of events completely differently. And that could be soldiers in war who see the same horrific things, and one can go back to combat and be totally fine the next day, and the other is scarred forever until they can really address it. Um, and same with like a million, like sexual assault, all these kinds of things. There isn't, I wouldn't say there's like a right or wrong answer to that, but one of the big things was kind of that at least the study I was looking at was like a secure attachment, right? If you were confident that you had somebody who would be supportive of you, um, then it was much easier to experience post-traumatic growth. So many of the people who I have, had sessions with who were stuck in a rut, more often, in almost every case, there was an issue because they never really figured out how to deal with things because their family life was never conducive to that. And that can mean a million things, obviously. Like some
Right.
people, I listened to somebody else that you had on, Dime, I believe,
Hmm.
and she was really eloquent in describing, and she really like got worked through some stuff on there. But like the number of people I heard say that who had never even thought about or addressed it, and
Yeah.
were stuck as a result, um, is really sad. Because I think, and like to me, this just makes logical sense. Most of the stuff I learned in my program was intuitive and then reinforced by things I learned. And to me, one of the things that seemed super obvious was like we figure out how to interact with the world from our family more often than not. Our family, our community, whatever that might be. So if your parents are drug addicts, or if your dad's not around, or if your mom, you know, is emotionally abusive or physically abusive, or how you learn how to cope with that in maladaptive ways that just extend into adulthood. And if you never address them and you never figure out where those are stemming from, you're pretty much screwed. Because there's no way that you can grow from a traumatic event, because you're just going to keep doing what you're doing because that's quote unquote worked for you.
Right.
Obviously, it hasn't worked for you, but you're alive, which is, to
Yeah.
some degree working.
Well, you'll remember, luckily, and you mentioned Dime, her mom, I think is like a real force. And, and was a rock the whole time. And, she has her creativity and then, yeah, I've seen it too, where the difference is really when someone takes you under your wing, it could be the difference between, or really believes in you. And then you have to also, I think, be willing to accept that, that love, because sometimes people do have plenty of people who care,
Sure, yeah.
but you feel so far removed from them emotionally that you can't even really accept that uh, from
and
them.
and like a lot of that could come from the people who are like obligated to
Hmm.
love and care about you, i.e. your parents, never did or didn't show it. That they
Right.
might have, but they just, and a lot of it is like a cycle, like, and it goes and goes. People don't, one of my professors would say, like, people don't become addicts because like they want to. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
no one's choosing this life where you're robbing and stealing from people that you love, and you're doing these things. There is something that drives that. There's also genetic components, but like nobody chooses it. So like it's this cycle that happens, and so to break out of that really requires work on your part,
Hmm.
because this is so much easier to just, you know, to stay on the status quo, um, which is to say, do it again, like keep repeating this cycle.
And right. And so I guess maybe going back a little bit, you talked about this sort of being a natural thing for you. I mean, for me
Mhm.
as well, like a little bit, obviously it's kind of why I gravitated towards the show. Your backlight is very strong there from the sun in Columbus. You had a really good crew there lighting up those lights. Nice.
Sorry.
It's okay. And so I guess having kind of a similar-ish um, vibe to you in that way, what what do you think what do you think it is? What because now that you've actually studied it and you've had these sort of thoughts reinforced, what is it that you've learned and uncovered that maybe you had already thought or maybe you didn't realize you were thinking, um, that has sort of been a good principle not for you but also like the mantra that you kind of share a little bit with people.
Mhm. I definitely believe and share all the time about everything we know has been, you know, we've learned from our family. But I was reading a book. I'm in the middle of it. It's kind of pop therapy ish, but
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty good. Called "Maybe You Should Talk to Someone." It's very popular,
Okay.
um, and it's, well, it's interesting because you'll see it, she talks about how she worked in Hollywood. She worked as an agent, as an admin, like as an admin for an agent, and was trying to like work her way up. And then she kind of realized that what she liked about it were the stories that she got to read. And
Mm-hmm.
so she was like, why, you know, like maybe I just, you know, want that. And I think I've noticed it with people as they get older. There are people who are super competent, even compassionate, but they don't really care about other people's stories. They're in their own world. They are really focused on what they do. And like, that's fine. Even Debbie, my wife, like, she will be like, she'll tell me like a snippet of something, and I'll be like, and like, like, did you ask a follow-up question? She'd be like, no. I'd be like, how could you not be curious? Like, it blows my mind. Because like I would just like drill
Yeah.
because that's what I would want to know. And so I think it's kind of this innate interest in stories. I mean, obviously I love good TV and good movies as well, and I care 100, you know, and your tastes shift as you get older. Like, I'm there was you know, a show um on Hulu called Normal People, which like there would literally be scenes of one of the actors just kind of like looking in the distance for like 2 minutes, which is an eternity. And like, but the show was so good, the acting was so good, and like psychologically was so deep. And then I read the book after, and the book was equally good or better. Um, and it was, I realized like I never would watch that when I was 18, but like it was fascinating, like to see that shift. And I realized it was only because I'm trying to like think of like what occurred in these people's lives to like make them make these decisions. And you spent time with them and you learned stories. So I thought that the reason I brought up that "Maybe You Should Talk to Someone" book is because she articulated it really well. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it was this like inherent love of stories and interest, and like you have to want to help people, but like some of it, uh, it's not selfish, but like some of it is just like, this is interesting to me. Like, I could sit and listen to someone tell a story, and you realize that like people's stories are bananas, man. I mean,
Yeah.
like, they
Well,
are crazy. And like, we had a very sheltered existence relative to like the people that I was seeing in my
oh
internship.
yeah.
And I like, but and then like the courage it takes someone to tell you their story, like a relative stranger, like astounded me. And it was just, it was like kind of a privilege to be on the side of that, in all honesty. And the people, yeah. So I think it really kind of boils down to that more than about anything else. There's a million ways to help people.
Right.
um
So I think, I mean, to me, I think that that's like a big, big thing. And that is something I also would credit from our family is we, we were brought up with tons of people in our house.
mhm.
Even when we didn't necessarily want tons of people in our house
Yeah.
every single day, every single week, for months at a time. But like we were constantly exposed, and not like one kind of person either, like
Right.
we really did have a good mix. And it was, yeah, like I am very thankful for the life that we've had, even with any ups and downs that, I mean, everyone's going to have them. So, um, but there is something about that innate curiosity in others that seems to be like an important thing, because it also kind of comes down to that being willing to take the love from others, or being able to see the love from others. I think, having enough awareness, even in your time of whatever, that other people are important, that it's not just about yourself.
Yeah, but I don't know that the two are necessary to coexist, in that, like, I think, and something that was definitely stressed during our classes was like, you have to be willing to like accept help and accept all these things, because naturally the people in the program describe themselves in very similar ways, that like, I was the person that people went to and blah blah blah.
Hmm.
So like they stress probably too much. We live in a very self-care kind of society. I don't dismiss self-care as super important, and like, and it's probably easier for me to know what I need because I'm older than most of the people, than all the people that were in my program. Um, and so like I'd figured out over time, like, the amount I needed. Um, but like, I don't think that because you're a therapist or that you are automatically mentally healthy. That is for sure um, not not the case, I would say.
Okay, so one thing that I like to kind of talk about with each person is, when you do realize that something may be a problem, and you do want to maybe talk to someone, etc.,
Hmm.
or actually you're probably not there yet. What are some of, in the trial and error phases, like what are some of the mental or behavioral pitfalls, to avoid, and then what are some of the things that you should be looking for to make sure, like, yeah, this is a good thing, you know what I mean? Because I think a lot of people try, or they seek maybe superficial, um,
Hmm.
solutions.
Um, I mean, like, I'm a believer that everyone would benefit from therapy, um, even if it's not formal therapy. You need somebody, like, I think that just having an outlet is really important. Um, and that outlet, the reason that therapy is nice is because people will kind of push back on you to some extent, and
Depends on the
give you,
therapist, though.
yeah, 100%. A good therapist should be a good combination of like just being there, listening, open-minded, but then like find, at least as a relationship develops, I think an interesting thing we learned, and this is a little rambling, but like, the estimates, and I don't know how you'd actually study this, but like something like 85 or 90% of what matters in a therapeutic relationship is the relationship. It's just rapport.
Hmm.
Whether you're a cognitive behavioral therapist or a psychoanalyst or any of these things, all secondary, all secondary to like whether you can develop trust with that person. So like, that kind of just tells you right there that like, you kind of like, everyone could use that, and everyone wants to bitch about their significant other at some point, or their job or something. And like, you just, like, having that is a important. And also then like, it's a good reminder that like, hey, you're not alone in this. Like, this is very, very common. Like a good therapist will be like, yeah, like you're experiencing what a lot of people experience. It doesn't devalue what you're saying. But like you should know, like, and then people are like, oh, okay, like, that makes me feel a little bit better that I'm not totally alone in this. I don't know if I completely answered your question, but
Well, I guess, well, the pitfall would be don't think that you're alone, you know, don't
mhm.
feel alone. Um, seek, seek someone, but make sure that I think you were about to, although I'm not sure what you were going to say there. You're saying as the relationship develops, you should kind of go from being a little bit pampering and caring to, you're going to say like challenge. I assume something like
uh,
challenge a little bit or,
yeah, like if you're never challenging your client, you're not really doing your job. Um, and like, listen, there's probably a huge difference in among clientele, like depending on who you're seeing. If you're seeing, and like, you might see people that just need to be listened to, and they don't really want feedback, but they kind of know that, and they just want that. And you know what? Like for some people, that's okay. And you are providing a service. Like there is such a thing as everyone talks about, being a good listener. It
yeah.
means listening, having some empathy, you know, words of affirmation, things like that. Those are important things. If you see someone long term, the nature of it should change where you can really push back and be like, well, like, what did we talk about earlier? Like, have you applied that? Like, have you really thought deeply about that? Um, and because you can't really grow in anything if you aren't a little bit uncomfortable or you aren't challenged on your beliefs. Um, and so the only way to do that properly is by being pushed back. And I think it's very akin to the world we live in now, where like everyone lives in an echo chamber and everyone is, you know, you just have your own opinions reinforced for you on social media. You only end up hanging, no one ever, like, people will not be your friend if you have different political opinions than them.
Right.
So like, how do you ever grow? Right? Like if you aren't willing to have a discussion with someone who disagrees with you on a fundamental level and leave it civil, you'll never grow, because you'll just, your own
Right.
mountain of opinion will grow upon itself. And it's very similar in therapy, because you've been doing things sometimes your whole life a certain way, um, and then you finally have somebody who they have no stake in it. Like if you talk to a spouse or if you talk to your best friend, it's very different, and it should be different, right? Like talking to a friend should not be the same as talking to your therapist, which is why if a therapist tries to be your friend, it's really bad.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I told you that story about the,
yeah, that's really bad. Um,
just the
and
short version for the
yeah,
listeners is basically I was at a dinner where a therapist who was the host was talking to their one of the guests who was talking about his therapist and how he was jealous that about another therapist crying in a session and then also being seen at the same wedding and then them having to end their relationship. So it ended up being a little bit of a violation of just about everything that a
yeah.
therapist should be doing, but it was pretty funny. It was a great story. Very LA. So okay, but I'm actually glad that you distinguished at the end between a friend and a therapist, because I was going to say, well, it sounds like what you really just need is support.
Hmm.
But but
Well, it's
but
not
it's
it.
but if you have more things that are maybe
Right.
you know
I
hindering
think
your happiness.
support is for sure important, but let's say you come to me saying that, I mean, I don't even know that every time, at work, your boss is walking all over you and you never get to express yourself. And as a result, you've been stuck in this rut for 2 years when, like, I can give you support. I'd be like, that sucks. Like, that sounds really hard. And that'll help in the beginning, just having
Mm-hmm.
someone listen. But like, if 2, 3, 4 months later, you're coming in and you're telling me the same things. How does that help you? It helps you feel better for 5 minutes, and maybe right after you leave. But like,
Right. It's like an expensive cigarette.
what if I start giving, yeah, what if I start giving you strategies for like, this is how you should talk to your boss, like approach them and say, hey,
Yeah.
I've been really thinking I deserve this promotion. And then that kind of thing. So it's not always about like critique. I'm not critiquing or saying someone's wrong. I'm just trying to push them towards the goals that they want to achieve. And
give them a framework, like give them a
yeah,
framework to do it with.
exactly.
Yeah.
And
That makes sense.
some friends can do that and some friends can't.
Some
And
friends
friends
just hand you a
shouldn't.
beer and tell you to complain about it more, and
Yeah,
that's,
and
yeah,
that's fine. And like
right.
people need that,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to diminish that
No,
at all.
but it's not going to change
Yeah.
the situation. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
No, I hear that. Yeah, see, that was why I brought up the sidebar earlier about the Holocaust survivor, because I'm so curious why now, even from the time that you and I were in school
Mm-hmm.
until now, the amount of like diagnoses, the need for therapy, the need that, like the rising anxiety. Obviously now during COVID and everything else, like it's pretty like the reason for the intensity is pretty obvious, but it is like remarkable how, like, to the point where this has like caused us to regress quite a bit, but that I do wonder, like, you know is is there like an inherent difference now? I mean, obviously internet, obviously these things change, have changed the world quite a lot, but like it's mind-boggling to think that it went from certain people need therapy, which was a very antiquated view, to like, well, probably everybody should have therapy. um and it's not to downplay that theory. It's like, but isn't that interesting that we now fundamentally all need something for our mental health?
Well, I think it's a few things. One is like, and I sort of touched on this before, and like, who knows if it's the chicken or the egg, but like depictions in pop culture have changed dramatically. Um, Probably even like something like The Sopranos, like probably helped seeing this big tough guy in therapy,
Hmm.
even though the therapy in it is not great, sort of
Well,
paved the
it is a
way.
mafia show.
Yeah. Um, like, so I think, like, I don't know if it's chicken or the egg, right? But like, there's just this growing awareness that it's important and that it's helpful. I do think that the need is greater. I think that social media, and I hate even saying the, like, because it sounds like a cliche, like this is every podcast on earth, social media is ruining our society, but like it kind of is. I mean, think back when we were in high school, right? If people, and we went to a tiny school, so it didn't really count, and everyone was, friends with everyone because we're, little Jews in our neighborhood. But like,
And also we were surrounded by like neighbors that wouldn't let us take a legal left turn out of our own
yeah,
driveway. So we were hated by everyone. So we had
yeah.
to kind of like
Um,
group together.
but like, think of, and like, I can't, I didn't like come up with this exact analogy. Someone else did. I can't remember who to attribute
Yeah.
it properly, but like, if someone had a party on a Saturday night, um, and you weren't invited, you would have had no idea. You'd just be home doing your thing, or maybe you'd have a friend over.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're on Instagram and you see, why are these five and I say girls because far more often, like, the anxiety and depression among teenage girls is like skyrocketed in the
Yeah.
last decade.
Yeah. Which is terrible.
Yeah. And it's not exclusive,
No.
obviously, to girls, but it's definitely more prevalent. And also, guys, there's still a stigma behind men seeking mental health. At least it's less than it was, but you're just so much more aware of what other people are doing, whereas we would have been blissfully ignorant. um and that awareness creates a void um, that that is filled in maladaptive ways, like maybe you start drinking, maybe you get depressed and you get on pills. There's just like all sorts of things that we didn't have to deal with. Of course we dealt with other things,
Right.
um, as just normal teenagers do, but I do think that the game has changed. I think
Yeah.
it's just
I
a
mean, I think
different
that
world.
that FOMO concept, the fear of
Hmm.
missing out, is like, that's an interesting one because, to, even when we were growing up as a younger brother or just as a kid, you look at what teenagers do, or kids who are older than you, or adults who are slightly older than you look at what they do, whether it's smoking, wearing torn jeans when it was the 90s or whatever it was, and like whatever it was that they were doing was cool to you. Even
Hmm.
having braces was cool when you're young and you don't have them. And then you have them in high school and you hate them, and it's like, so, yeah, I mean, it is fascinating. And now you just literally see it. I mean, and you see it with a filter on,
Yeah.
you see it, you
Well, no one
like,
posts a picture of themselves looking bad
yeah.
or having a bad time
Right.
unless they're just looking for those sympathy
Yeah, yeah.
likes.
Right.
So like you only see people looking their absolute best and happiest, which is like, so everyone, if you're not old enough to have some perspective,
Hmm.
um, you think that everyone's life is perfect except for yours.
Right.
Nobody else has these doubts that I have. Nobody else feels like shit half the time. Nobody,
Yeah.
which obviously is not true. But
Yeah.
when you're 16, that's really hard to have that perspective. Um, and having your parent tell you, "Don't worry, it'll get better," doesn't really help.
So yeah.
Or it can, but it did.
Right. I mean, it's interesting. I remember learning actually with Stiffelman in high school, in like the history of science. He talked about how human beings are the only mammals, or probably animals, that they like delay adolescence and adulthood, or they delay adulthood and allowing independence, you know with like
Mhm.
what we call adolescence and teenage years, basically, um, the longest of any type of living species. And like when he said that, like, I'm in high school and I was like, is that why like all this puberty I was like, is that like what puberty is like? Is that why we get
Mhm.
mad at our parents? Like, it made so much sense to me. I was like, yeah, because if I was like a lion right now at this point in my life, I would be kind of having to fend for myself. You know what I mean? Or if I would
Right.
like, if like you're not a baby anymore, your cub days or whatever are over. And yet with humans, because we have this introspection and this like global view at the same time, and we have to learn how to balance it. And that's pretty much our challenge in life, I think, overall, is as a teenager. And it's like, if I took a selfie right now, the way I have it presented, you only see really cool art in the background. You don't see a bed, which is actually made and nice, um but you don't see it, but I know that I live in this world that has everything right and wrong and hard and whatever. And yeah, so that's fascinating. All right, well, now I think to kind of bring it home, why don't you tell us what you're up to now, because you just have some very exciting news, especially for those
Yeah.
local Columbus people.
Yeah. For anyone in Ohio,
Well, do you do telehealth stuff?
yeah,
So that's
everyone does
everybody.
now.
That's
Everyone,
everybody. Yeah,
well, I still think there's state restrictions, but um,
because of COVID, you can't do telehealth over unless you have a
I
mask.
don't know if you're allowed to like do it out of state license wise,
Okay.
but I am starting my own private practice.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Is and like I don't know. I think one of the questions or one of the things you alluded to earlier and was like with a family and all this. One of the reasons I decided to do this because obviously it would have made more sense for me to do this a decade ago, um, when like I didn't have as many obligations in terms of like family. I have two little girls one who's 3 going on 30 and one who's about to be 8 months. But like I saw what Debbie does for a living, who teaches at a charter school here and who taught at an inner city public school in New York for 8 years before we moved here. And like she, along with most of her family, are like some of the smartest, most driven people that I've met. And like she could literally do anything she wants. And I don't say that about many people, but like she always assumed she'd be a lawyer. She always, like, she could be a computer programmer. If she focused on that for 6 months, she could get hired by it. Like, she's just
Yeah.
that talented. And she chooses to be a teacher because she really believes in it. And that was like very inspirational to me. And like, I didn't want my older daughter's Ari, I didn't want her to grow up with a parent who just kind of hated doing what they were doing, day in, day out. And I wanted her to have that like positive role model of like, hey, both of your parents do things that they want to do, and listen, you still have a good life. And like, so you can make that. And that could be, if you want to be a lawyer, great. I don't know why anybody would, but like, if you want to be, like, go ahead.
You're getting
Um,
last with Ruby in the back of
yeah.
the studio here.
Like, to each their own is my
Yeah.
point. And like,
Yeah.
that's what I wanted her to like, and like, I know it's cheesy. She was way too young to like care, but she'll never remember a time when I did anything but this.
Right.
And that was really important to me because I was, I mean, I'm not, I don't mean clinically depressed, but I was like depressed coming home from work at my first job here. And Debbie was
Mm-hmm.
pregnant, and like we had this all this exciting stuff going on. And I would be like miserable and dread going into work, and
Mm.
then have a brief like respite from it from like Friday night through Saturday night. And then by Sunday, I was already dreading going back on Monday. And like, that was just no way to live.
Yeah.
And it didn't have as much to do with the work as like the work environment. Like, let's be clear.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, but that makes sense because
but
if the people around you are
yeah,
sucking the life out of you.
right. And
Yeah.
like that happens. And going back and doing this, and I know it's going to be a tough go of it here in the beginning, but like, it also is going to give me the opportunity to like be a better dad and be around more and not subject to like asking for vacation and begging for
Yeah.
extra days because of the holidays. Like, I'll eventually control my own destiny. So
Yeah.
like, if I want to work, if I want to see 20 people a week, or if I want to see 35 people a week, both options are on the table. And that will determine how much money we make and how much free time I have, both of which are really important to me. And I know not everyone operates that way, and that's totally fine. like,
Yeah.
um, like I don't, I used to like have a lot of self-conscious about that, especially living in New York, um, where like it seemed like everyone was in finance or going to law school or all these things. And I started down those paths, and I was like, no, I don't think I would ever be happy doing it.
Yeah. I agree. I mean,
So
not me.
yeah.
Um, well, cool. Thank you for joining. Wait, how do they find you? How do they find your?
So navigationcounseling.com
We'll
is
put a link.
my
Put a link
newly
for it.
christened website. Um, let's see, you can also email me at josh@navigationcounseling.com if you have questions or want to schedule something, even just to chat on the phone for a couple minutes. Be totally fine.
Cool. Thanks. And then, okay, I'm gonna put you on the spot. We're in this quarantine COVID time. Everyone is like on edge. There's
Mm-hmm.
one little tiny message, and you could have already said it, but if you want to just repeat, what's one little takeaway for people sitting at home and maybe in and out of a job for a little while?
Yeah, I think like what I try to remind myself, and it's very, very difficult, is we are we are only in control of our reactions to things and not to like what's happening around us. Um, And so if this pandemic is anything, it's an opportunity to like learn about control, because everything that's happening is like totally out of our hands. And we have, it's the worst politicians, the worst media, the worst everything is happening right now. And so if it bothers you, you like you get to take a step back and just be like, all right, like, why is this bothering me? And like, if there's going to be completely legitimate reasons, like if you are not if you're out of work because of this, there's nothing, like, that sucks. Like, you should know that, and like accept, like, you should know that is a real thing, and don't diminish the fact that like you're hurting because of that. But at the same time, it's going to pass. And like, we can only really control what we can control. And so much of our discontent in this world is trying to exert control over things that are just impossible. And this pandemic, while not something I would wish on anybody, is a good opportunity to try to remember that, at least.
Right. When somebody said to us, like, the power that in one decision, in every decision that you make, the amount of power in that. And I think, yeah, exactly right.
Right.
Well, thank you, Josh. That
Yep.
concludes our episode of Traumatically Triumphant. Again, if you want to feature your art back there, or give us some more studio time, or get some merch in on the show. Otherwise, look up Josh at navigationcounseling.com.
Navigationcounseling.com.
Right on. See you next time. Yeah.